Welcome everyone, I'm Dale and this is Cinema Historia. This week we're going back to 1937 for a screwball comedy called The Awful Truth, starring Irene Dunne and Cary Grant. And this is directed and produced by Leo McCrary. Now where does our story begin this week? Well, it begins with Jerry Warner, played by Cary Grant. And it shows him at the beginning of the movie getting a tan under a tanning light at a sports club. You see, he had told his wife that he was going to Florida, but instead he ends up going to his sports club in New York City. So he wants to make it look like he got a tan. Well, he comes home, and shortly after that, Lucy shows up, his wife, played by Irene Dunne. And Irene ends up showing up with her handsome music teacher, Armand Duval. And Lucy explains that she got a ride home from her music teacher, the car broke down, and they end up staying over somewhere. So Jerry gets a little suspicious, and when Lucy finds out that he comes home with a tan, but it had been raining all week in Florida, she becomes quite suspicious. So at that point, with the mutual suspicion, they want to start divorce proceedings. So it goes to court, and they've worked out a lot of details except for one, and that's who gets custody of the dog. And the dog's name is Mr. Smith, played by Skippy. Well, Mr. Smith ends up going to Lucy for custody, but of course Jerry gets visiting rights. And the court states that the divorce will be finalized in 90 days. So Lucy ends up moving into an apartment with her Aunt Patsy. And at that point, after she moves in, she meets across the hall Oklahoma oil man Dan Leeson, played by Ralph Bellamy. And he's in town with his mother visiting. So they end up seeing one another, and it comes to the time of Jerry's visit for the dog. He has visiting rights. And that's when Dan is over there at the same time, and of course Jerry gets suspicious that they're seeing one another. So the next part, Dan and Lucy end up going out dancing, and when they go out dancing, they meet up with Jerry, and he's at the club with a singer, Dixie Belle Lee. So of course Lucy ends up being suspicious of him having an affair with somebody new. So at this point, they go back and forth, bashing out each other's attention. The rest of the movie goes that way for quite some time, actually. Most of the movie is going back and forth. Jerry ends up crashing one of Lucy's music recitals and causes a big scene. Lucy ends up going to one of Jerry's get-togethers, posing as his sister. But at this point of the movie, we're getting down to the 90 days, and everything gets finalized at midnight. So does the awful truth mean that they're going to be breaking up for good, or does the awful truth mean that they need to reconcile and get it done before midnight? It's a very comical movie, one of my favorites. It did really well at the box office. It came out on October 21st, 1937. It had a budget of $600,000 to make, but it earned $3 million at the box office. Maybe that doesn't seem like a lot, but if you convert it over to today's dollars, $600,000 means it costs $11.3 million to make, and it earned $57 million at the box office. It was also the first pairing for Irene Dunne and Cary Grant. They liked working together so well that they were in two other movies. They played in My Favorite Wife in 1940 and Penny Serenade in 1941. I have both of these movies, actually, if someone would like a review on one or both of them. It was also nominated for 6 Academy Awards. It was nominated for Outstanding Production, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Adaptation, Best Film Editing, and it won Leo McCrary Best Director. So, a little more history and a trivia question coming up next. This week for history, I have something they would have driven back in 1937. Here's John to show us his pride and joy and tell us a story.
So this car started life in 1937. It's a 1937 Ford Deluxe, which means it had 2 windshield wipers, which was a real option, but it only had 1 tail light. I've had to put the second tail light on just to keep people from getting too close. The car is powered by an 85 horsepower Ford flathead engine, single carburetor, and 3-speed transmission. The car originally was black. It was painted this taupe color later in its life. It runs quite well. The brakes when I got it were cable operated, which meant any sort of faster than about 40 mile an hour driving, you were putting your life at risk because trying to get the brakes to work consistently was a real problem. So I updated it to 1940 Ford brakes, and now braking is not an issue. I've also had to update the electrical work in the car to 12 volt just to make the headlights brighter and the tail lights brighter, and including a third brake light. The reason for that, again, was just simply safety. The old almost candle-powered headlights in the dark, you could see the car, but you couldn't see out the windshield where you were going that clearly. So it really made life difficult. The other thing that I've had to add is turn signals. Again, that wasn't an option in the car at the time. Your arm was your turn signal. And it's just a nice, neat, old original car. The car was sold to a farmer in Orangeville, Ontario, Canada, and after buying it, he bought it with the intentions of driving it to Florida. And at that time, he had a manservant, which was a gentleman that got injured on the farm and then became his servant. And he drove the farmer himself to Florida 3 times in this car. When I got the car, it only had about 80,000 miles on it for its entire life. When the farmer passed away, the car was willed to the manservant, and he in turn kept it for a number of years before selling it to the chap named George that I bought it from, and he bought it when he was 16, drove it to high school for a couple of years, and then switched to another car, put this one in the barn, again in Orangeville, and there it sat till almost the late 80s. And at that point, he had just retired, and the school that he taught at in Orangeville called him and said, "We need a shop teacher for a year. The existing shop teacher wants to take a year sabbatical." George said, "Okay, fine. I'd love to do that." He said, "Can I bring in a project?" The school said yes, and he took this 37. It was black at the time and kind of rusty from sitting in the barns. Took it in, and the students spent an entire year bringing the car back to life. And painted it this taupe color. So it was a good project for the kids. It taught them history of the automobile and about the Ford flathead engines. When the car was completed, so was the school year. George took the car back home, put it back in the barn, and there it sat until almost 2006. And at that point, he had suffered 2 heart attacks and had other health issues. His wife was getting quite concerned because he had this car along with about 4 other Model A's and some other stuff. Then she said, "If something happens to you tomorrow, what am I going to do with all these cars?" So this car was put on the market for sale. It came out in a new paper that used to be around called the Triad on a Sunday evening. I happened to be at work. The chap that was coming in after my shift had a copy of the Triad paper under his arm. I grabbed it to have a quick peek. This car was on the back page. I saw the price. I called the chap when I got up in the morning. He said, yes, the car is available. And later that evening, I owned the car. Wow. And
Very interesting story, John. Thanks very much for letting me film today.
Okay, thank you.
Boy, isn't that a neat story and a very cool car. In this week's trivia question, was there anything improvised in this movie? Yes, there was. Most of it was, actually. They had a small script, but not a big one. The director, Leo McCrary, believed that improvising was the key to great comedy. He states that a lot of times we went into a scene with absolutely nothing. So McCrary would sit at a piano on the set and pick out tunes and sing until a solution came to him. Now, why did he like improvising? Well, back in the day, that's how he did a couple of big comedy teams. He did a lot of the Laurel and Hardy shorts, and in 1933, he directed the movie Duck Soup, which was a Marx Brothers movie. A big thank you goes out to John for showing us his car. Without his history, this video would not be possible. And to all the kids that were playing in the park, they came over to see what we were doing, and when we told them we were filming a YouTube video, they were very cooperative, so a big thank you to the kids. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope to see you back next week.